I'll shill.
And we are live. Mr. Clossington, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. I just wrapped up with a stream, sort of after action report on Old Glory Club's East Coast Forum.
Yes.
We had a very large conference in Northern Virginia last weekend. Over 110, 120 people showed up. Very, very big conference. Just streamed with the organizers, going right into uh, wait, what? Why did you invite me out here? Was this stream?
Oh, this one tonight?
Yeah, yeah. What am I doing
Just
here?
Pennsylvania.
Oh, oh, really? Like who
Yeah.
cares about Pennsylvania?
Well, so it's kind of twofold. One, because I am aware that you are well versed in the state of Pennsylvania, but then sort of one of the things I'm doing too is this is actually
Hmm.
the fourth stream I've been doing on individual states, just trying to get our guys and get them to figure out, or excuse me,
Hmm.
to help us understand individual states. So far it's been like Mr. Patriarch, he took over Alaska, and then there's a fellow by the name of Arthur and Callie who handled Texas, and then another fellow I know, Kentucky Squirrel, who did Kentucky. And so now we're blessed to have you on here telling us all about Pennsylvania.
Awesome. I actually know Mr. Patriarch pretty well. We
Yes.
yeah, we actually bunked together at the last OGC National Conference. He's a great overall guy. I've known him for quite a while now. Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, for Pennsylvania, I think I'm probably uniquely suited for giving a sort of overall history of where Pennsylvania comes from, what its general trajectory was, who the people were, and what its general future is. Um, just as a little background, I grew up in central Pennsylvania. Fresh out of college, lived just outside of Philly, and then for the last couple of years, I've lived in Pittsburgh. So I've lived pretty much everywhere in Pennsylvania, and on top of that, I've had various as the sort of history autist. I've read countless books on Pennsylvania history, published quite a few articles on the sort of niche elements of Pennsylvania history, and what else? Um, and yeah, I've also been quite involved with local politics for county GOP, throughout Pennsylvania. So yeah, I'm probably uniquely qualified to give this chat.
Well,
Um,
I think so. And so before we dive too deep into it, I'm super curious. I always tell people in any given state, maybe not Rhode Island, I don't know. I've only been there once. But in any given state, there's at least two intrastates. And so that have their own culture, that have their own, sometimes they're completely own people group. And so I'm curious, how many states would you say are within the state of Pennsylvania and still evidence themselves right now?
so regionally, like I guess politically, you could always divide Pennsylvania into like three distinct areas. There's Philadelphia in the far southeast, and then Pittsburgh in the far southwest. These two cities have always historically been fairly liberal, and then the rest of the state is colloquially called Pennsyltucky. Um, although regionally it does have a lot more variation than you'd probably give it credit for. So in the sort of going east to west, right? You have Philly, which very very big city, lots of history there. You have its surrounding four counties, right, that are probably the wealthiest, areas in the state. The four surrounding counties of Philadelphia, and then outside of that ring are all sorts of farmland. The farther east you go, um, to the point where South central Pennsylvania is just farmland Amish, uh, and central Pennsylvania and the northeast. That's all like Appalachian.
I think,
Oh, there was a little bit of robot in there for a second.
yeah. Just give me 1 second. I need to put my mic back in. But
Yep, no worries.
yeah. So for Pennsylvania, there is Appalachia. It's kind of like it's actually kind of like the highway from which all the Scots Irish eventually populated Appalachia, even throughout the South, which I'll get into. But I guess you know to get into the regions, Central Pennsylvania is. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I could probably send you a pretty good sort of outline of what a friend of mine actually did post um, a pretty good breakdown of the regions. I'll send it to you really quickly. Um, all right, here you go. I'm gonna try and fix my headset real quick.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to work on swapping the screen out. But yeah, so I won't ask any questions while you're working on that, but I will say I've always wondered if there's a difference between the heavily Democrat area of Philadelphia, well, excuse me, heavily liberal area of Philadelphia, and then the liberalism that takes place over in Pittsburgh. If they're distinct in many ways, or if they're more or less the same.
Um, in my own personal opinion, it's so. I just sent you a quick little map of the regions, but yeah, I'd say it's fairly different because yeah, the dark blue in the southeast is the surrounding counties of Philadelphia. It's very wealthy. The purple in the center, that's all sort of Amish territory and farmland. Um, the northeast, the sort of Poconos area, that's all sort of post-industrial, like coal country. Used to be coal country, but now it's sort of well, it's the Poconos, sort of touristy, but also very depressing ex-Rust Belt. The green is all Appalachia, uh, mountains and mountain ridges. Um, and then I'd combine like Erie and Crawford with the rest of the pink. It's a sort of Midwest, sort of Great Lakes, Rust
Yeah.
Belt. And then Pittsburgh is Allegheny, which is like the southwest. So
Okay.
the way that Pittsburgh is designed, it's a very small city. Imagine it's like a little triangle facing like west, and it's a little tiny tip of civilization that has the universities, some mid rises, and outside of that sort of small tip where the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers meet and create the mouth of the Ohio River. That small tip of sort of liberal hegemony is like just about all that there is. So the sort of rot of urban decay in Philadelphia is, it's a little bit more set in than Pittsburgh, which is a little bit more fresh. Pittsburgh used to be a lot more rough than it used to be. Over the last like decade or so, I'll get into the sort of history of the rise and fall of Pittsburgh a little bit later, but it used to be a lot rougher than it is right now. There's been a lot of money pumped into medical research in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh. In Philadelphia, though, uh, imagine.
It's Pittsburgh Mayo.
I'm sorry.
Is that the Mayo Clinic out there?
Uh, I I don't
I
believe
might be
so.
wrong.
No, that's Minnesota. Um, but for Philadelphia, right? So you have the center of the city, right? Center city, and then you have the waterfront, which are both very nice. You know, you go to the Independence Hall, all the touristy spots. Um, it's all very nice. You go to like the east, around the zoo. It gets very ghetto, gets very rough. That's like the sort of very, very rough area of Philly. Up north, it's a little bit rough, but not quite as rough as East Philly. You go to like South Philly, and it gets a little bit rough there too, but not too rough. Um, but South Philly over the last like few decades has had a sort of various waves of gentrification that have made it a lot more habitable than it used to be. So there's sort of gentrification politics going on. Um, there are also all sorts of infrastructure, internal political battle over whether the sort of counties and state wants to contain you know criminality within the city, or do we want to expand structure and potentially infect the you know, high property value surrounding counties with this crime at the cost of making it more easy for commute and access to jobs. So there's sort of internal political battle that you don't really see in the rest of the state. And then Harrisburg is in Dauphin County. Uh, it's a very, very tiny, like it's sort of like a footnote. No one lives in Harrisburg, the nominal capital. Right around the center of the state. So that's a sort of general overview of what it looks like. Um, yeah, in
All
terms
right.
of where the wealth is. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking. So I'm listening to how it's set up, and how would you best describe, historically speaking, the state of Pennsylvania? I imagine it's too simple to say it's the first Ellis Island or it was DC before there was DC or anything. How should we start framing this? Because now it is almost that we could just sort of step over Pennsylvania and think that it doesn't play a big role. But I mean, there are still, it's got a population that affects voting rolls. It has a history there. How do we wrap our minds around what Pennsylvania was and is?
So in terms of what Pennsylvania was, its initial settlement, kind of ended up, you know, between the initial settlement in the 1680s and the sort of incorporation as a state after the American Revolution. After after the American Revolution, sort of internal politics were already kind of settled. The political divides, the immigration flows, and yes, there is some truth to the fact that it was Ellis Island back in the day, because of how tolerant the Quakers were, and I'll kind of get into sort of pros and cons of this. Um, but when when Pennsylvania was first settled, right? Uh, Actually, I'll go before the 1680s. Um, so this is a very, very big state. How many Indians do you think there were in Pennsylvania when William Penn first shows up?
Individuals or various tribal nations?
Individuals.
Uh,
This is a big state.
well,
Rough guess. Rough
yeah, because
guess.
I'm remembering the whole. Oh, there was 100 million, and then 90 million were wiped out. Um, let's see. I don't know Pennsylvania because I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think what nations were out there. That was too far south for Iroquois, wasn't it?
Okay, so I asked this because when William Penn showed up, there were only about 5,000 Indians here
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
entire state, and it's a massive state.
Yeah.
Um, so before Pennsylvania was settled, New York was settled by the
Five
Dutch, right?
thousand.
Yeah, there are only like 5,000
Yeah, I
Indians
would have
here.
definitely been figuring 30 or 40 at least. Okay.
Yeah, so what happened was the Iroquois traded beaver furs in particular to the Dutch in
Oh,
exchange for guns. And they used these guns to hunt more beaver, expand their hunting lands, and to wage war on the rest of the tribes in the region. So what happened was the Iroquois, they confederated, and then they essentially bulldozed. They went from upstate New York and
right.
bulldozed, in western Pennsylvania is the Erie and the Monongahela. In the sort of green central region, there were the Susquehannocks,
Okay.
and then in East PA there were the Delaware. They essentially massacred the Erie. They made the Susquehannocks, the what Susquehannocks there were left were a couple hundred living in caves as tributaries, and the Delaware were like, please, just Europeans, just give us some sort of protection from these
Yeah.
monsters. And this was a sort of genocidal. They were called the Beaver Wars, and you know, by the time that Penn showed up, the Delawares were willing to cut Penn a deal. It's like, hey, well, Penn, he was a Quaker. William Penn, his name, he was actually William Penn Senior. I'm sorry, Junior. William Penn Junior. William Penn Senior, his father, he fought. He was a sort of moderate royal during the English Civil Wars, but after the English Civil War, he sort of switched sides to the sort of parliamentarians for a little while. He conquered Jamaica for the British under, you know, Oliver Cromwell, and he lent, the British state so much money as a sort of rich lord. And, William Penn Sr. kicks the bucket. His eccentric son, William Penn Jr., takes up the Penn mantle. He's a Quaker. It's a very, very strange. It's a very strange dissenter Protestant faith that denies any sort of church hierarchy, which there aren't any priests. Everyone is their own priest, and you can, you know, whoever wants to talk in church can just go right ahead at it. There aren't churches. There are just meetings and fellowships of like-minded Quakers. They're all pacifists, and that's
Well,
going to
and it's
bite them in
nearly
the butt.
it's what am I trying to say here? It is a I don't think it's unfair to say that it is a more organized form of individual Gnosticism, cloaked in a Christianese.
So I wouldn't go far as to say Gnosticism. It's like I would say that is the most anti-clerical dissenter faith that you could possibly have. Um, and eccentric William Penn Jr. He cuts a deal with Charles II. You know, forgive the debt of my father in exchange for the land of Pennsylvania. Um, Pennsylvania was already kind of inhabited. The first inhabitants were from New Sweden, right, in modern day Delaware. But the New Sweden extended a little bit into modern day Pennsylvania and Chester County down there, in this far southeast. But uh, you know, New Sweden was conquered by the Dutch, and then we kind of conquered it from the Dutch when the Duke of York conquered New York. So now New Sweden was, New Netherlands, then it was kind of New York, but no one really had governorship over it. So the king was like, "Hey, forgive the debt, and you can have all the land." Um, and New Sweden has a few different legacies, right? First, foundation of the state of Delaware. Second off, a lot of the people from New Sweden in Delaware were Finnish, and those Finns brought with them the techniques for creating the first log cabins, which the rest of the frontier would use for the future. Um, But William Penn, you know, it's a sizable amount of money. So how do you make money with, a state size of empty land? Uh, he essentially sells. He's essentially, in order to make money off the colony, he sells. He sells estates in these nice, neat packages. Uh, he tells his Quaker friends, "I'll give you a small townhouse plot in downtown Philadelphia, and I'll give you like 150 acres of prime farmland in the Philadelphia suburbs, um, so that you can both have like a little downtown office or like some sort of industry if you'd like, or like a little factory if you want, and you can have some renters producing like food or flax or any sort of good that you want." And he attracts a whole lot of these sort of middle class artisanal Quakers from London, from Wales, from Northumbria. They're sort of middle class. They already have like all sorts of trades and tools, and they're Quakers, so they're pacifists. They get along with the natives. They don't build a Penn doesn't build a wall around Philadelphia because he maintains such good relations with the natives. Um, and he has a very high quality immigrant who ends up settling his territory. And this, the sale of this land is what funds further development of infrastructure for the land. Um, However, he comes across all sorts of issues. Um, for one thing, he has a border dispute with Lord Baltimore in the state of for the state of or the colony of Maryland, just south of him, and he has to go back to England um, to sort of settle this issue. And then Glorious Revolution happens, and he kind of supports the loyalists against William of Orange, and that gets him in all sorts of trouble. So he ends up having to stay in England for way longer than he expects. Um, but in the meantime, while he's in England, uh, the toleration of the Quakers is tested. I have like one source saying that a pirate ship goes up the um,
Now, this is the
go
toleration of the Quakers in England, or the
yeah
toleration of the
i-
Quakers in? Okay,
the toleration of Quakers in Pennsylvania, right?
in the colonies. Okay.
So in the colonies, they don't believe in violence. They don't, but they're also very puritanical and moralistic. So pirates go up the Delaware River in Philadelphia and raid their shipping, but they don't want to, you know, stop the pirates because of ethical concerns. So they kind of gently nudge some of the wild Scots-Irish settlers on the frontier to, dislodge the pirates for them.
Well,
And
this
they
is similar
also,
to some
yeah,
degree. The various Amish groups, be they in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, they still cling to their. I don't think they phrase it as pacifism, but that's functionally what it is. But that lack of a sword and that lack of taking arms, they cling to that, but they're only able to do that because of the outside external forces that enable it.
yeah, they really don't want to, do anything. They're also tested with the slavery issue. How can you be a pacifist, peace-loving Quaker and own slaves?
Oh, so the
And
Quakers
these,
kept slaves.
yeah, at first, but then they were the first to start a petition to end slavery in the colony.
Okay.
Even before the Puritans, the Quakers, tried to advocate for the abolition of slavery, and they eventually kind of schismed the Quakers. Um, Meanwhile, while they're having their internal Quaker schism, they're sort of secular, not necessarily secular. They're very tolerant. Immigration um, allows all sorts of crazies to show up. So you end up with like doomsday cultists, with in the caves of Philadelphia. Um, there is like the
Now, are
cave of the
Quakers
Whispering
themselves
Mother, and
Anabaptists?
no, they are not. The
Okay.
Anabaptists. So the Anabaptists.
Well,
Um,
I should say, are they
so,
are they functionally Anabaptist in sort of the same forms? Because I was just curious where I was going with it was the continental Anabaptists, the radical Anabaptists. I was curious how much overlap and if they got along.
um, so yes, they did actually get along a
Okay.
lot,
Yeah.
especially in the political coalitions that they eventually made.
Okay.
Um, so the Anabaptists were, modern day like Netherlands and like Western Germany. So like I said earlier, like the Quakers would buy, townhouse plots and also own estates in the countryside. However, uh, they sent the nice peaceful Quakers subcontracted out the renting and maintenance of their country estates to the Dutch, who found themselves some slaves from starving Palatinate Germans. And essentially, what these Dutch would do, this is based off of "On the Frontier with Carl Antes" by Edwin McMahon. Um, Essentially, the Dutch would show up to these war-torn German towns, evacuate them, and then ship them to Philadelphia and sort of starve them in port until they sold themselves into indentured servitude on the Quaker farms for 10, 15 years. Um, and this is how the sort of initial settlement of Pennsylvania began, with the Quakers living in these like little nice townhouses in Philly. The sort of four counties, you can see Bucks, Montgomery, Delaware, and Chester being inhabited by Dutch and German settlers. And then eventually, you know, we start to get the settlement of Appalachia. Um, like these Germans, a lot of them came unwillingly or questionably, but a lot of them also came voluntarily. The first, you know, major German settlement was, Germantown, Pennsylvania. It's in the suburbs of Philadelphia. It's still called Germantown today, but it was settled by the Stuttgart Company, which was, a venture from Anabaptists in Germany to evacuate this war-torn area and set up in a new place. Um,
That's I am blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, to have my German side come in almost completely through Philadelphia.
Yeah, so this is sort of like the ground zero for the initial German migration.
Mhm.
And then after the German migration, there were the Scots Irish, which are kind of like the most sort of famous like uh, immigrants of Appalachia. The Scots Irish, so they're from two sort of different regions, right? The border of Scotland and England, and Northern Ireland or Ulster country.
Yeah, which
So
is their other name, the Ulster Scots.
yeah, the Ulster Scots.
Oh.
But they weren't like Irish, Northern Irish. These were Protestants who uh, essentially what happened was the English have tried to they essentially tried to cede Ireland.
Right.
The English tried to cede Northern Ireland with a sort of gentry class um, of English upstart Protestants, and due to increase both due to sort of economic stagnation and increased rent in the borderlands of England and Scotland, as well as economic stagnation from particularly the linen trade in Northern Ireland. Essentially, the sort of Scots Irish Protestants used their business connections in Philadelphia to emigrate to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's main export in terms of like raw resources was flax, which is made into linen clothing, uh, like linen cloth. And you're growing flax in Pennsylvania, you're shipping it to Ulster, and then the Ulsters send their you know debtors and like all of their sort of poor who can't afford rent to Pennsylvania to pick up flax to keep up linen production. And the Scots essentially beeline right for the frontier where land is free and there aren't any Indians uh, for most of the area. The Iroquois do still like enforce their hunting rights over the Appalachia region, and there are all sorts of like border disputes. And what's left of the Susquehannocks and the Delawares um, end up resisting and fighting, end up fighting the Scots Irish. Um, Now the Scots Irish, they have a sort of reputation of being these wild, frontiersmen. Um, these sort of wild frontiersmen who, the quote in this Meckman book is, they'd shoot an Indian the same way they'd shoot a fox. They come into contact because these tribes, right? The tribes of Indians are very decentralized and personalist. So you might make a treaty with like one band of Indians, but if you don't make you know, a land deal with all of the little bands in the area, they don't all unanimously respect your property rights. So the frontier is a very dangerous place, and these are like hard, poor Scots Irish who've been through hell with wars of religion and and they- they're in a very
Kings
rough
marching
area.
on them, and
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's also where the sort of frontier culture comes from,
yeah.
because in like the borderlands of Scotland and England, you have this sort of Anglo cattle raising tradition that has you know, uh, passed from the sort of mother country you know, into the frontier of Pennsylvania. And you also have like the production of whiskey. Uh, it was initially Scotch, but corn and rye grow very, very well in like Western Pennsylvania. So, that ends up becoming the state's or the Western parts sort of main export.
Hmm.
So, to sort of get back to like the main story though, Penn eventually, William Penn eventually dies, and what happens to the initial Quakers? So, all of William Penn's sons were just pretending to like Quakerism. All of them convert back to Anglicanism whenever William Penn Sr. dies. Um, and a lot of the sort of Quaker elites of Philadelphia convert back to Anglicanism, also because of the sort of purity spiraling of the Quakers that moved to Pennsylvania.
So
Um,
it wasn't just a reconversion, or however you want to phrase it. It wasn't just a return to Anglicanism out of some sort of utilitarianism, but for some of these folks, there were actual theological issues at stake and at play.
y- yeah,
Okay.
there was a there was a sort of purity spiral, but there were also valid sort of concerns like, hey, maybe we should just get back into Anglicanism and get out of this away from these like crazies. Um, but eventually, um, like these sort of founding Quakers that converted back to Anglicanism. Have you ever heard of the Boston Brahmins?
No.
So the Boston Brahmins are the sort of Yankee Puritan elite, like the old money families of Massachusetts.
Okay.
Um, they're like the wasps, like the old money.
Yeah.
And in Philadelphia, we have what are called the Old Philadelphians. They're
Okay.
like, 50 or so major old money families that kind of run state politics from behind the scenes and have for like 3 centuries.
Sure.
But I digress. These are like the WASP families.
Yeah.
And they create. Um, so William Penn, he is a Quaker, and he's a very, he believes in Quaker values. He wants he wanted the state government to be as distributed and peaceful and consenting as possible. So the ratio of citizens to representatives in the colonial government is very, very, very low because there's very, very high representation, and he pisses off everyone, William Penn, by including like Puritans and Anglicans in like the same Privy Council, like ruling this colony, because you know High Church Anglicans and Puritans both hate Quakers. Famously, like the Puritans of Massachusetts, like they lynched 5 Quakers for finding out that they had Quakers among their mix in the late 1600s during like the Salem witch trial era.
Yeah.
Um,
So I was actually wondering. So it wasn't an aspect of that, but it happened around relatively the same time. Is that fair?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's around the same time. Um, well, that's a sort of different story. Like the Salem witch trials, that happened essentially with the second generation of Puritans, right? The first wave of families come, um, and they go through all the hard times. And the thing about the Puritans is their kids went two sort of different directions, where the moderate ones sort of become these sort of city slickers, but the ones that live in the country in the frontier double down on their Puritanism and become these sort of fanatics,
Right.
and the sort of social dynamics end up
Well,
becoming very
it's
yeah.
hard. It's hard to wash out the complete impact of Reformed theology and of Puritanism, because you had the Northern Puritans, but then you also had, frankly, due to a lot of Scots Irish influence as well, the various Reformed camps down south of what would become the Mason Dixon line. And so there were various Presbyterian groups out there. And I want to say the overwhelming majority of presidents that we've had denominationally were Presbyterians, not even Anglicans, but Presbyterians. Is that correct? I think that's correct.
No, we've had a lot more Anglicans.
Okay.
We had a
Have
lot
we?
more Anglicans. Like,
Okay.
this is a sort of Googleable question.
Right.
Okay, how many Presbyterian
Google takes all the
presidents?
fun out of it, though.
I
Like,
want to say like I want to say 5. Okay. Google says at least 8, but I don't. Mm, do,
so
is Trump really a Presbyterian?
eight out of
It,
eight out of
is
40 some is not much. So you're right.
like isn't Jackson technically, he's kind of an atheist? Let's see, like
Eh,
Buchanan
well,
never went
but
to
so even
church.
even if that's formally true, right? Functionally, they're still claiming the Presbyterianism, because the Puritan side absolutely had an impact on U.S. politics, and to the degree. Now, this one, let me get the actual phrasing correct, because I already got egg on my face once. But let's see, because we've
We
got
we
the
had
Google.
11 Anglican presidents,
That's it.
and only, yeah, 11. We had 2
So
Quakers though.
who who's the overwhelming group?
So the thing is, there's no like consensus.
Okay.
People never get the Quaker presidents right though. People never guess them. Like who do you think were the Quaker presidents?
Uh
They're
wasn't
actually
Nixon
kind
one
of
of them?
recent. Yes, Nixon was, because of his mother was a sort of
Yes.
a rabid Quaker, and the other is Herbert Hoover.
Okay, would
Which,
not have got that.
yeah, so yeah, no one really knows anything about in popular culture. No one knows anything about Hoover's like personal life. Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, so
yeah,
I did double check this one though, because like I said, I already got egg on my face, and I'm pretty sure that you ever heard the term the Presbyterian War?
is this like the Bishop's War?
Nope, no. It was it
No, I
was a
haven't.
colloquialism that the loyalists would use against the revolutionaries during the American Revolutionary War. And so
Yeah.
there are still
Mhm.
guys in reformed circles that wear that as a badge of honor.
Well, like um, in so I guess in this narrative, right? I started going into like the 1740s with like the breakdown of the Quaker power.
Sure.
But yes, by like the Scots Irish ended up being bearing the full brunt of the British retaliation in Pennsylvania during the American Revolution. Um, but in terms of the governance of Pennsylvania, we developed the first political party system between the county party, which was like the Quaker, like the Anglican elite in Philly, and then the Scots Irish. The county party said, develop land out west and make profit for the land speculators and pens. And then there was the Quaker Party, which the Quaker moralists that said the Quaker moralists and the Amish and Germans who said, don't antagonize the Indians and develop, you know, the area in blue and purple as before encroaching on the Indian land, and also these Scots Irish seem to have a drinking problem. Let's enforce some morality rules. Um, Benjamin Franklin ends up becoming the sort of head of the Quaker Party, even though Franklin wasn't a Quaker. He was actually a kind of a Puritan from Massachusetts, but he ends up becoming the sort of model upstart Philadelphian in his political career. Um, like Benjamin, well, the power of Quaker political influence, though, it dies during the French and Indian War because in order to um, like all British colonies during wartime are required to either provide a certain number of troops as a percent of their population or give money. And Quakers are pacifists, so they refuse. And so, you know, they essentially disavow all political shenanigans and become sort of like the Amish used to be, where they didn't engage in any politics at all. Um, and then these two political parties just kept on rolling out. You know, develop the land, push west versus develop the land that we already have. And Franklin, he he develops all sort. He founds like the first public library in Philadelphia. He creates it's called the Leather Apron Club. A YouTube channel is actually named after it. But
I remember that
um,
guy.
yeah, it's actually a sort of it was Franklin's scientist buddies who tried to figure out how to build a functioning sewer system. How do you have proper like firefighting companies? Where do you place firefighting companies? How do you prevent lightning from striking roofs? Stuff like that for the public good. He also becomes, I think it's like was it the third or fourth Grandmaster of the Pennsylvania Freemasons. Um, I'd argue that Pennsylvania had the very first Grand Lodge of Freemasons in the English colonies, but the there's a little bit of contention with Massachusetts over who had first. Um, but you have a sort of Quaker, or not Quaker, a sort of cosmopolitan Philadelphia middle class striver society that you didn't really have anywhere else in the early colonies. Um, so eventually, what we have is, American Revolution kicks off. The Quakers, are pacifists, so they supply both armies with, with stuff. A few Quakers, Nathaniel Greene, become, he becomes General Washington's like right hand man. He was a Quaker who decided not to do the whole pacifism thing. Um, during the Revolutionary War, right? There's sort of four phases, right? At the beginning, it's all in New England, right? Lexington, Concord, uh, you know, Bunker Hill, uh, and then the Battle of Brooklyn Heights in New York City, and then there's the sort of second phase that is Washington, crosses the Delaware River, wins the Battle of Trenton, and then like four other battles and chases the Brits back into New York City. Um, and then the Brits, they decide, hey, uh, we can't force our way out. Let's just land in Philadelphia and try and take the colonial capital. Um, Pennsylvania is sort of a sort of moderate state that, during the American Revolution, we were led, you know, by Franklin, who was kind of getting to be a little bit of an old man, but he was very pro independence. His constituency very split down the middle. The old Quaker Party, uh, of the the dark blue and purple, they want to stay with England. John Dickinson, uh, penman of the American Revolution, he is from Pennsylvania. He's a sort of moderate who says, we can broker a peace and find a middle way, which is very in line with the Pennsylvania ethos. Um, but during the second phase of the American Revolution, the Brits beat us in a few different battles. Um, they take Philadelphia for a little while Washington's at Valley Forge. And then we're eventually able to expel the Brits out of Pennsylvania during the Battle of Monmouth, and they have to evacuate south. Uh, and this famous battles of like Camden and was it Kings Mountain and Yorktown? Those all happen in the South. But then there's a fourth phase of the American Revolution that no one talks about. So, but that's between 1783 and 80, or 81 and 83, where basically what happened was the Brits know that they're losing the war. They probably can't. They don't have any standing armies left. They say screw it and essentially tell the Indians, every colonist is a good dead every dead colonist is a good colonist. They say, massacre all of the frontiersmen.
That would never come back to affect any of the Indian nations.
Yeah, so the Iroquois, or about half of the Iroquois tribes, sign up for this. The Susquehannocks and Delawares join in. Shawnee join in. Everyone with a grievance, essentially all of that red area in the northeast has to be evacuated in what's called the Great Runaway, after the Indians indiscriminately just destroy cities. There are all sorts of really nasty, small, and undocumented frontier battles that no one really talks about. But yeah, the Scots Irish end up being this sort of um, s- they end up being their own sort of authority, um, because Quakers, they're pacifists. They don't organize a state militia like every state usually has. Benjamin Franklin actually proposes that they adopt it after the Quakers like lose power, but you know, these Scots Irish on the frontier had to be sort of self-organizing into their own militias, and they're very independently minded people. You know, they've got their little hollers, and they are going to defend it from Indian raids. You know, whether the nice Quakers and Anglicans in Philly like it or not. And you know, after the American Revolution, there is a sort of awkward phase where the Quakers end up being these sort of ardent Federalists who end up becoming like the sort of tax agents for the feds, and essentially scalping all the farmers for all the farmer veterans with these really nasty federal taxes. There are several tax revolts. Uh, Later on in the American Revolution, there's like an army revolt where where like where Lancaster County, it's in purple, that militia revolts and storms the Philly Capitol. Washington almost has a mutiny when he's in New York City, besieging what's left of the British Army. And then after the American Revolution, we have the very famous Whiskey Rebellion, which I wrote a very long article on, called "Death and Taxes" for the Old Glory Club.
Hey,
It's a fat, yeah.
and I do want to come back to what you wrote for the OGC. The one you were just talking about, where there was all the
Mhm.
frustration and they almost marched on Philadelphia. Is that what you
They
had said?
did, they did.
Okay.
They actually kicked Congress out of Philly, and they had to
Was
like
this
relocate. Hmm.
was this with Benedict Arnold?
No,
No. Okay.
um, no,
Because
it's
I was curious what he had to do with the state of Pennsylvania.
Benedict Arnold. Um,
Yeah. Did he have
Nothing really.
anything?
uh,
Nothing. Okay.
um,
Good.
so Benedict Arnold's actually from Connecticut, and his great treachery was he gave away the American, essentially their fortification plans for defending New York City.
I will say my familiarity with him is both one of, yes, he did wrong, and he was among the best leaders for his men. But what also threw me on Benedict Arnold wasn't he the commander of? Hold on,
Saratoga.
we've got Google. Uh, Military governor of Philadelphia after the British withdrawal in 1778. So
Yes.
that's what threw me. Okay.
Yeah. His story was something like, so the American Revolutionary Army was very ad hoc, and all sorts of
Hmm.
favoritism, and yeah, he was the sort of
His men didn't get paid, so he paid them out of his own pockets.
well, I mean, so well,
You you know what I mean, though. Like
it's
if he's the it. Okay, let me. There are times in history where, regardless of what was actually going on, the men under the leadership of a fella have a particular conception of that guy.
yeah. So the so Congress couldn't actually really levy taxes. It could only
Sure.
promise that it'll pay back banknotes, but it didn't actually have a collateral. And a few different Pennsylvanians actually stepped up to finance the revolution. Uh, Mainly, his name was Robert Morris. Think of him as like the sort of Pennsylvanian Jeff Bezos. He has sort of
Okay.
shipping empire, and he said,
Yep.
I'll extend as much credit from my business as I can to make sure that we can finance the guys at the siege of Yorktown. And, you know, eventually, when the war is over, he designs the first Bank of the United States. Uh, it's chartered as the well, he technically creates the proto first bank of the United States. It's called like the Bank of North America. Um, Today, it's called Wells Fargo. Uh, but he essentially creates this bank to extend lines of credit to the federal government to ensure that the troops are paid, but he expects to be paid back with interest. Um, and so, we had to sort out our tax policy. So after the American Revolution, um, you know, we slap on a few tariffs, but that's not quite cutting it. So we have to levy consumption taxes on alcohol. But the problem is essentially the green, pink, and yellow portions of the map, like all of central and western Pennsylvania, are reliant on whiskey production to generate income. Like that's their only
Yeah,
cash crop.
and this is pre-whiskey rebellion that we're talking
No,
about right
no,
now.
this is the whiskey rebellion.
Okay,
Um,
that's where you're
so
getting. Okay, yeah.
so so essentially, here's like essentially the whiskey math that I've found through a few different books. So in in Appalachia, you could sell a gallon of whiskey for about 25 cents. Um, that's essentially the production cost. If you can get it to Philadelphia, you can sell it for about $1, but it costs about half a dollar to ship 1 gallon to Philly. So you make about a
Yeah, so
quarter.
100% margin, more or
Well,
less.
well, you make about a quarter per gallon of whiskey you sell to Philadelphia. If they could ship it out to New Orleans through the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, you could also sell it for about $1. But
Which is still French at this point, yes?
yeah, it's actually Spanish.
Okay.
Um, but the thing is, you know, they could sell it at about $1 per gallon. However, the cost of using like a flatboat or keel boat to ship it it only costs about a dime to ship it to New Orleans on a flatboat. So, that's it's almost, you know, twice the profit, uh, like two or three times the profit for shipping it to New Orleans as Philadelphia. However, we're a new country. We hadn't, figured out all of our diplomatic, you know, policies yet. We didn't have a trade deal with the Spanish. So they didn't let us ship whiskey through New Orleans, and there were ultra tight margins for shipping whiskey to Philly. And then we slapped on a consumption tax, or we slapped on a manufacturing tax for whiskey production, and essentially, charged a quarter per gallon of whiskey produced.
Oh, so we wiped out their entire.
So we killed their profit, like the
Yeah.
entirety of their profit margin,
Okay.
and you know, essentially no one. Essentially what happened was the local county militias essentially created their own little proxy governments and intimidated farmers into not complying.
Yeah.
We tarred and feathered
It's
quite a few of
early
them.
early Union Wars.
Well, yeah, that comes a little bit later.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
proto. How? Yeah.
yeah. So what happens is, eventually, um, the feds get their shit together and start issuing subpoenas for non-compliant farmers, and essentially what happens is about 900 guys storm the main tax collector's like mansion and besiege about 20 federal soldiers in this mansion, this battle of Bower Hill. And then essentially a large rabble of like 5,000 guys marches on Pittsburgh and tries. Well, they almost declare independence from America, but they don't quite make it. They kind of just get drunk and went home.
Okay.
But eventually, Washington, sends out an army of like 12,000
Right.
guys to pacify the area. Um, but then, like the next year, like we get a trade treaty with Spain, so the tax actually doesn't hurt that much, and we win the Northwest Indian War. So we essentially we essentially take Ohio from the Indians and sell it to new pioneers who need to be fed and supplied through, the city of Pittsburgh. And so like the economy essentially bounces back right away anyways. And this opens up like the sort of golden age of the keelboatmen. Uh, have you ever seen Davy Crockett and the River Pirates?
The old Disney one with Fess Parker?
Yeah,
I don't think so. I think I've only seen King of the Wild Frontier.
yeah. There's like there's a like a on top of King of the Wild Frontier, there is Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, which uh, the sort of antagonist for the first half and ally in the second half is Mike Fink, who's this sort of braggart, keelboat guy. He ships whiskey from Pittsburgh to New Orleans in a keelboat and just floating down the river, makes a lot of profit. Fighting off river pirates on the rivers, um, and fights Indians on the way. He's this frontier figure from Pittsburgh who has all sorts of he shot a feather off an Indian's head from 100 yards away, or you know he beat so many people in like rough and tumble fights, which is like imagine wrestling except the goal is to gouge out your opponent's eyes. That was the the big frontier sport back then. um but it
There
was.
is a place
Mhm.
in Illinois called Cave and Rock.
Yes.
Does that okay? You know where
Yeah,
I'm going with this?
that's like the climax of the Davy Crockett movie.
Yep. And that's the thing. If you guys go out there, it's out near the Garden of the Gods in southern Illinois. And they're like within 45 minutes of one another. Anyway, if you go out there, that's where they filmed portions of the Davy Crockett movie that he's talking about. Again, it's with Fess Parker, which uh he was probably the best Davy Crockett I think we have in film history.
Yeah, probably.
I mean,
um
Billy Bob did all right, but I think I'm probably going to go
but
with Fess Parker.
yeah, there's a lot to love about that particular Alamo movie, but it's
Yeah.
it has its own virtues. um there are a few things to note though, that relate to this topic. Davy Crockett, his main political constituency, right, are the sort of Scots Irish, sort of land squatters. So, uh, you know how I brought up how the Penns made their money just selling land. Well, 401ks didn't exist back then. So, if you're a wealthy guy and you want to make money in the future and stash your retirement somewhere, what you did was, you bought, 10,000 acres of land for a penny a piece from the state government, and then you broke it off into like 20-acre, 50-acre lots and sold it for 5 cents an acre and to farmers.
Yeah.
Um, what
To
they
the point, guys that are listening, George Washington has lands in Kentucky that he never once saw. He owned them, but he never saw them.
Yeah, he also owned a ton of land around Pittsburgh. Like this is how like I said, you didn't have as much of a stock market to invest in. You invested in land. Um,
Like Bill Gates.
yeah. What Davy Crockett's issue was, his main constituency was, uh, claiming that claiming squatters' rights, essentially saying that like, hey, you guys in the cities haven't seen this land. It's free for the taking. You're not going to improve it. We're improving it. We're improving it on the ground, so we don't owe you. Uh, we don't owe you money to get a deed on this house, on this property. Essentially, homesteading rights. That was his main issue. David Crockett did, he did expend a ton of political capital, though, opposing the Indian Removal Act, which is, there's a lot wrong with that. The Indian Removal Act, um, which, you know, uh, is kind of neither here nor there. I do want to say, though, that figures like Davy Crockett, another very famous trailblazer from Pennsylvania was Daniel Boone, who was actually he's sort of held up as a sort of poster child for like Scots Irish, but technically he's the son of Quakers. Um, but he did lead he didn't lead a particularly Quaker-esque lifestyle. He did shoot quite a few Indians, and
I was gonna say anti parental rebellion can be a hell of a drug.
yeah. So essentially, what happened was a company of Virginians essentially bought land from one tribe of Indian bands in eastern Kentucky, right? Fair and square. They invited all like 100 chiefs over. We buy this land for X amount of dollars. We own it. However, they didn't consult another tribe that had overlapping land claims, and so there was, the Shawnees kind of went to war with them. Uh, and Daniel Boone has quite a history, but I proud Pennsylvanian history. Um, so then we get into War of 1812 territory. Um, so there are two sort of highlights for War of 1812 history. There's Philadelphia and Erie. Erie is in the top left-hand corner, and Philly is in bottom right. Um, Philadelphia, it is this sort of it's probably one of the largest ports in America at the time. It also starts creating like the first sort of big shipyards for naval shipbuilding. Philadelphia. Um, it eventually is host to William Crampton's Son and Sons, which is probably the biggest naval shipyard in like the late 1800s by that point. Um, Philadelphia produces, well, it starts building right after the War of 1812 this 26 gun ship called the USS Pennsylvania. It's the biggest ship in the world, but due to issues with Congress funding a navy, it never gets built for about 20 years, and we don't actually use it. So, it goes a little bit to waste. But during the War of 1812, you know, Pennsylvania. I won't get too much into the causes and the course of the war, but essentially Erie is it's on Lake Erie, which Lake Erie, other side of Lake Erie is Canada, and essentially in the first year of the war, the Brits have a few boats on the lake. They quickly, overrun our shipping, and are able to like move soldiers around this lake very, very easily, to the point where the Brits could have, landed a bunch of guys and threatened Pittsburgh at one point. So what happens is during the winter of 1812, We send Oliver Hazard Perry, Commodore, up to Erie, ship uh, a bunch of carpenters up there, and they spend an entire winter building ships. And then later that summer, we win the Battle of Lake Erie, which is this like nasty, fleet versus fleet action off the coast of Ohio, where Perry ends up, winning the entire lake for America for the rest of the war. And he's able to relieve Detroit, which fell. Commodore Perry IPA is an awful beer, by the way. I do not recommend. Um,
Fair enough. So you could get Great Lakes out in Pennsylvania. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
like so. I do not recommend the beaches of Pennsylvania. The beaches around Philly are muddy, and the beaches around Erie are also very muddy. Um, so I don't recommend. Um,
Oh no,
yeah.
I'm in Great Lakes beer. I didn't know you could get
Oh,
their beers out in Pennsylvania.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
we have Erie right on our. Yeah, we have a
Yeah.
Great Lake too, just as our
Right.
claim to fame. Um, but yeah, that's America and or Pennsylvania in the you know War of 1812.
Yeah.
Um, After the War of 1812, it's just a general period of prosperity. There's early industrialization, coal mining and iron production starts to become really big in the sort of central Pennsylvania area. Um, yeah, so the green and red areas have a sort of boom where they become so the biggest coal producers in America, and um, and then I'm skipping a little bit quickly. I'm not sure how much time we have, but
So I
um,
I am good on time. At the same time, I don't want to capitalize on yours. So
yeah.
at whatever pace you want to do.
So, um,
And if
how
you
would
need
I
to
phrase
split
it?
this, we could split it as well.
So, no, I'm fine. I can go as long as you want. So,
Okay.
politically, like how I said that there's Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, very liberal. The rest is Pennsylvania.
Right. Yep.
Well, you know, we have very Whiggish, um, very Whiggish Philly and Pittsburgh, and the rest is sort of deep Democrat, Dixiecrat or proto Dixiecrat.
Right. Right.
The one Pennsylvania president we have is James Buchanan. He's not a very good president, but
He's the only one from Pennsylvania.
he's the only Pennsylvanian. Um,
I guess I never thought that hard about it. I just assumed you had more than that.
no, we only have one. He's not very
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
He's a sort of career politician. He brown noses. His career is just brown nosing Andrew Jackson, but
Yeah.
Jackson kind of sees right through it and is like, you know, I see what you're trying to do. Like workaholic plus schmooze the boss. So he ships him off to Russia as an ambassador because he doesn't really like him very much. Um, where he sorts out, the probably the longest standing trade treaty we have with Russia. I ended up picking up a copy of Buchanan's, personal letters, and he he's very emblematic of his time. He says, I really like the Tsar personally, but he's got to go. We have to install democracy in Poland, and you know we can't have any of this stifling despotism uh, in our own country because you can't talk politics in imperial Russia, or else the secret police are going to get you. Um, in his personal letters, Buchanan describes American democracy as very conservative and localistic, like as opposed to very decadent and guarded, like decadent but guarded imperial politics of continental Europe. Um, you're on mute.
Thank you. No, I had jumped in too early, and I thought he was contrasting uh, other forms of republicanism and democracy within France or whatever. But no,
No,
he was
no,
contrasting the
Russia.
imperial court. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, there were like he made a point in his letter saying, there are no politics in Russia. There's just schmoozing
Okay.
the czar, um, but politics were very very local in, well, in a lot of Pennsylvania. It's very very, very, like the cities can be very cliquish. Like Benjamin Franklin, for instance, he ran what was called the Whig junta, which was sort of like a power brokering fraternal sort of clique that ran Pennsylvania politics for about 20 years. Um,
Where where does that come out of? Is that some sort of reaction to the Quakers? Is that an outgrowth of Quakerism?
no,
It,
I think it's a react. Well, Quakerism and particularly the politics of William Penn. William
yeah.
Penn wanted as distributed and consensus building of a governance structure as possible, ideologically. Like that was his aim. But in Philadelphia, what you had was a very vibrant striving, like a striver culture, where if you wanted to be you could be a wealthy merchant, but that didn't really mean much unless you also made improvements for your society, you know, helping out with the fire department, chipping in a little bit of advice for running the sanitary sewer systems, organizing the militia. So, you could be wealthy, but unless you were a public figure contributing something to your neighbors, you weren't a full citizen. And that's a sort of the early Pennsylvania Republic, the early Pennsylvania Republican ethos. Um, so where was I? Um, so yeah, Buchanan. He's a sort of a brown noser. He's a workaholic lawyer. He gets on Jackson's wrong side.
I have
Event
never heard of a politician like this. I mean, he
No,
really broke the mold.
allegedly he was the first gay president we had. Although I I think this is a gross mischaracterization um, of what he actually was. Like, I actually have his, read his letters. He was absolutely heartbroken when his fiance died very suddenly of some sort of illness. He was absolutely wrecked by it, and he threw himself into his work, and uh, like at the time, you know, he had a bunking space was pretty rare in DC, so he ended up bunking with a congressman, and people made gay jokes about him. But how much how a lot of it is sort of politically motivated, sort of a little bit.
Right.
Uh, yeah, it's
Convenient whispers.
yeah. I mean, he
Right.
he 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 was, I think, like the only unmarried president we've had. So it does raise suspicions, though. Um, in terms of Pennsylvania, though, in this time period, general prosperity in the central region, industry building in Philadelphia, and then there is the very first oil boom in American history. Um, so what happens is oil is struck in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859, and this kicks off the very first oil boom in American history. Um, I actually did a live stream with Christopher Sandbatch on the history of whaling, and
Nice.
yeah, so like I at the time I visited the whaling museum in New
N-
Bedford and read Moby
yeah,
Dick for another stream. Yeah,
were they are wells in schools? Pods. Wells have pods.
pods. Yeah,
Yes. Okay. So were there lots of pods on the coast of Pennsylvania, or were they further north up
no,
towards Maine? And okay.
there were a ton of Quakers though up in whaling.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Wait, they
so
that's so interesting. The Amish are kind of like that too. It's like, I mean, I'm not going to get into the ethics of whaling, but it almost seems like if you're a pacifist, you wouldn't do whaling, but I guess they're creatures, they're not human.
well I remember there's a quote from Moby Dick. I ended up reading this, the tome in preparation for a stream that never happened. Um, but I don't regret it. There's a quote from it that said something like, you know, Quakers are, passive. They're pacifists by nature, but they show absolutely zero, mercy towards any of their business rivals. Um, you know how I said like, the Puritans, burned five Quakers alive in like the late 1600s.
Yes.
Well, what was left of the Quakers, evacuated to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard.
Okay.
And in Nantucket, they created the first like whaling ventures. And eventually, they had like what do you use like whale oil for? Um,
Lanterns. Yeah.
yeah, candles.
I was gonna
Um,
say it was early electricity.
yeah, and the very best like whale oil, you know, came from like sperm whales,
Mm.
and so but in the early colonies, um, either the whalers could ship oil to London or they could produce it locally. And the very first candle makers were set up in Newport, Rhode Island, and uh, I'm not sure how much I could say, but there was a sort of cartel of Sephardic Jewish candle makers that tried to strangle the Quakers out of tried to price gouge them. Um,
So I was curious as we had been talking earlier, um, and then there was the issue of them being the tax runners for the newly elected government. I was catching some awful Shylock vibes there, and I was wondering
what he
if
here
there was
here's
ever
so there were actually very few of this sort of tribe in early Pennsylvania. They were mostly in Rhode Island during the
okay.
American founding. However, the Quakers, you know, out-tribed the tribe in the whaling industry, and a sort of cabal of Quaker merchants, pooled resources and made their own, candle factories,
Yeah.
and moved to New Bedford, where they set up, this giant hub, and eventually, they used the profits from their whaling endeavors to diversify and create uh, massive textile mills in New Bedford, which is where uh, you use whale oil to also lubricate spinning jennies for fabric manufacturing. So it's sort of one-stop shop, right? You have a cabal of Quakers up in Massachusetts that they own the whaling ventures, they own the candle making facilities, and they own the textile mills. Um, and you know
So
during this,
were
yeah.
were the Quakers? And maybe let's go back to
hmm
William Penn. Were they considered old rich? Were they sort of the nouveau riche? What
So
I mean, were they merchants or were they landed?
so they were both. Like I said
Okay.
at the very beginning, they were essentially like the sort of Welsh like gentry and artisanal class. And
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, they like the early ones bought, like I said, the nice package deal with townhouse property and estate, and they came with their tools, their skills, and their knowledge, and they set up shop pretty quick in Pennsylvania. And they were also very shrewd and very honest businessmen. So everyone liked to use them as sort of middlemen. Um, and the sort of ex Quakers, became the sort of Episcopalian old money. Like, do you know where the term mainline Protestantism comes from?
Actually, no. I mean, I know what it means, but I don't know its origins.
It's the mainline passenger uh, rail from Delaware and Montgomery County to downtown Philadelphia. It's
No
essentially like
way.
yeah, it's the rich it's the rich ex-Quaker Pennsylvanians who rode the
Okay.
rail to church every Sunday to hang out at the Wasp Episcopal Church in downtown Philly. Like you could look this up. But that's where that
I
comes
mean, I
from.
trust you on it. That's just wild. So
Yeah,
that's where mainline came from.
yeah, it's a mainline
Okay. Okay.
rail, mainline
Yeah.
passenger rail. Um, but yeah, that eventually, we essentially killed off all the whales, or we almost hunted them into extinction by the 1850s. But then guess what? We discover oil in Pennsylvania in 1859, and we create this big oil boom. Um, yeah, so we no longer need whale oil. Uh, we said, yeah, we no longer need whale oil. Um, we're going to use oil from Pennsylvania, and we're going to use like these new railways and the Erie Canal to like ship oil everywhere, uh, to wherever industrial centers we need. Um, and yeah, that creates a sort of boom for about a decade. Um, and a lot of the sort of rich or the rich railway tycoons make a lot of profit off of shipping oil and coal and timber and all these products throughout
Now,
America.
the coal, if I, oh, I'm sorry, you're talking on an American basis or Pennsylvania right now?
Uh, Pennsylvania, but we do have
Okay.
some of like the most like evil railway tycoons in American history.
Sure.
Um,
Well, because I mean, Philadelphia at that point was still punching, punching high. Yeah.
well, have you ever
It
heard
was
of
still a
a
heavyweight.
Jay Gould?
Yes, but place him for me.
So he was notorious. He was the sort of most notoriously evil like railway tycoon in
Okay.
America. You know, Tammany Hall, political slime ball.
Okay.
Scammed people out of their like railway bonds and
Hmm.
stocks. And his real claim to fame is building the Erie Railroad and using really shrewd, like sort of scummy, uh, kind of criminal intimidation to you know, consolidate his railway holdings in the northwestern um, Pennsylvania area. You know,
Okay.
Cornelius Vanderbilt tries to like buy him out and
Hmm.
subvert his company, but instead, essentially, what Jay Gould does is he like prints like a million shares, and after Vanderbilt spends like millions trying to buy the company, just makes all of his shares worthless after
Right.
issuing so much stock. um you know Jay Gould once said, if I could, I would pay one half of the proletariat to kill the other half. He's a real he's a real,
Okay.
really you know misanthropic
Yes.
misanthropic evil guy.
Okay.
But you also have like the rise of like big industry in Pittsburgh. Um,
Yeah.
Most
Well,
famously,
so that's
yeah.
what I was going to dig into a little bit. If I remember correctly, you had said the coal was coming primarily out of the northeastern portion of
Well,
Pennsylvania.
it's pretty much everywhere in
Okay.
red, green, and pink. Like
Okay.
the
All
pink
along
is
the
all,
mountain line.
yeah, all along the mountain line, and the pink
Okay.
area is where the big oil boom is.
Okay.
We have all of these big railways being built all across the West, by these sort of evil,
And then
megalomaniacal
what are
robber
you?
barons.
Are you jumping on the Ohio? So you've got the Great Lakes in the northwest, and you've got your shipping lanes through there. And then I'm trying to remember. I'd have to bring up a national map. What waterways do you have along the western side and the southern side?
Um, Along the west, if you see Allegheny, that's where the
Hmm.
Ohio River starts. The Ohio
Okay,
River dumps into the Mississippi,
that's I was. Yep.
and then Philadelphia has what's called the Delaware River. It runs all the way, essentially north. Well, it sort of branches out all across like the red and the purple.
Okay.
Um, so there are two sort of distinct waterways that cut through it all. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
what?
that was especially at that time. I mean, you guys were set up for interstate and intrastate manufacturing travel
I
industry.
I think I also like sort of skipped over Pennsylvania in the Civil War. Um, so we had Buchanan was a sort of Southern sympathetic Northerner who, through a whole lot of incompetence, lets the Union fall apart and doesn't do anything to protect it. Um, Pennsylvania during the Civil War, we have the very famous Battle of Gettysburg, but we also end up, you know, we're the sort of hub for the Underground Railroad. It goes right through Franklin and Adams and Cumberland and reaches up north. Um, we're very anti-abolitionist for most of the antebellum period. you know I have a few local newspapers that said 1840s, abolitionist tried to come to town, but he was run out by the locals who just didn't want any agitators there. But then things changed with the Fugitive Slave Act, where the courts had to, they were mandated to, capture slaves, and this radicalized a lot of people. Throughout the Civil War, um, we had, I think it was the largest Knights of the Golden Circle, a castle north of the Mason Dixon, up here in around Pennsylvania, around, I think it was Lehigh County, and like the Knights of the Golden Circle, or I posted a very large article on this a while ago, but they wanted to create this sort of slave.
Is that found on your Substack?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
Knights of the Final
perfect.
Filibuster. Um, but Yeah, we had all sorts of like sort of Copperhead, Confederate sympathizing cells all throughout Pennsylvania, and you know, sabotaging different communications and railways and whatnot. Um, but we didn't have any outright revolts. Um, I did come across in the Erie Maritime Museum a Confederate flag of a Confederate pirate ship that roamed Lake Erie during the Civil War. It's oh
Well,
um
that's I'm thinking
yeah.
that part of the pushback north of the Mason Dix line, a big portion of it came out of Ohio, if I remember correctly as well. And it might be well. See, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth again, but I was thinking maybe one of two people that were jailed for dissension within the Union was from Ohio.
Yeah, like Ohio had a lot of they had a lot of copperheads out there.
Hmm.
Um
Which are a lovely snake if you guys ever see one. They're,
yeah.
you just have to keep your eyes open because they'll like they just stay there and they don't bite you until you step on them, but there's no warning sign, so you got to keep your eyes open.
Yeah, we have plenty of them around the Appalachians.
Yeah.
What's I gonna say? So, I guess getting back on the sort of timeline, um, after the Civil War, Erie becomes the staging point for what are called the Fenian raids. Um, so, uh, the sort of proto IRA, Irish Republican Army, they have this big brain scheme, right? So the Union imported, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Irishmen to fight in the Civil War. They come here, and a lot of them are veterans, and they have this scheme. So we're going to use Erie, northwestern Pennsylvania, as a staging point. We're going to invade Canada, and we're going to hold it ransom until the UK gives back Ireland home rule. Um, so this doesn't actually go very well. Yes.
I
Um,
mean, it's pretty wild.
so yes, a couple thousand of them do rally, and they do invade Canada, and there are a few battles for the first raid, but they're eventually beaten back. And when they try and go for round two, essentially our Coast Guard catches them at port and sends them both to jail. So it doesn't go very far. These are called the Fenian raids, by the way. Fenn.
That's what I was going to ask.
I
PH or F?
Yeah,
Okay.
IAN. Yeah. It's a sort of wild story. But that doesn't go anywhere. Um, and what else do we have? Oh, we also Pennsylvania was home to some of the hunters' lodges, which were sort of American volunteers trying to liberate Canada from the UK. Um,
The
we
what?
well,
That was a thing?
the hunters. What was that?
That was
The
a
hunt.
thing? I feel like an idiot. I've never even the Hunter's
So
Lodge. We were
the
trying to liberate Canada
can
from
from the
England, from
Brits.
the
Yeah,
UK.
yeah. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's the rebellion of 1837. Um, yeah, so we hosted a bunch of like good old boys that wanted to cross the border and help the Canucks gain their freedom. They were quashed pretty easily, but it's the thought that counts. Um, and the Irish tried to after the Civil War twice, but they didn't really get very far.
Okay.
We also had a few, American pirate ships around the Niagara River, gun running for Canadian rebels trying to liberate Canada.
Privateers.
No, no, just smugglers.
Okay.
Uh, the
Not anything so classy. Okay.
Yeah, so the Brits actually did catch, the main smuggler and threw it off Niagara Falls. This did cause a little bit of a diplomatic incident, though. um, yeah,
Well, I'm
so
thinking I'm overthinking it here, but the amount of people that went over Niagara Falls in a barrel, I'm wondering if any of them were citing that particular incident.
um, so shoot, what was it called? Um, um, what was it called? It was like I forget what the diplomatic incident was. Incident. It it's the was it the Caroline? I think. Yeah, it was the Caroline affair. Um, there were all sorts of like fun images that you could get from that. Um, I'll just send you one real quick. Um, but yeah, we tried to pick away portions of Canada several times. It just doesn't end very well. And it was all kind of half-hearted, anyways. Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah, the yeah, it's like one of those like little pieces of American esoterica that
Right.
so wild that you know don't really think it's real until you see people actually made paintings of it throwing it
Yeah.
off Niagara Falls. Um, so so
Okay.
so after was it the Civil War? We had the oil boom, we had the um we had the railway boom, and the next was the big steel boom in Pittsburgh, where there's a town just south of Pittsburgh called Homewood, and it was the site for the world's largest steel foundry. Uh, you know, Andrew Carnegie, and it became U.S. Steel, but it was this massive behemoth of a company that you know took over railway, or it took over steel production. Um, there's a very famous, it's like the home, or I'm sorry, it's the Homestead foundry, and there's a very famous Homestead strike where you know this is the Union Wars, where labor tried to organize and these robber barons tried to quash them. Um, it led to hundreds of Pinkerton like rent a cops versus the strikers breaking out into like violence.
The Pinkertons.
Yeah, it got so bad that the president had to order, I think it was Cleveland, had to order in the Pennsylvania militia to quell both the Pinkertons who got kind of captured by the strikers and held hostage, and broker a peace. Um, but it was quite hellish, the working conditions, and old photos of like Pittsburgh will show just how environmentally desolate it was, as was like Philadelphia when it's just in its industrial peak. um, so labor relations, strikes, you know like mustache twirling robber barons versus sort of, we didn't really
Yeah,
have. Yeah.
it's sort of that 1950. I was going to say stereotype, but I'm just thinking of the Hanna Barbera, the not even the evil genius, but it is the robber baron in the top hat. Exactly what you said, twirling his mustache and just
It's like Snidely Whiplash or whatever his name is.
yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it's altogether, going back literally 15 minutes ago, there is this English European merchant who is different than some tribal merchants, but it's that same sort of nasty legalistic enterprise.
Yeah. We like Pennsylvania sort of peaked in this like late 1800s, like early 1900s period in terms of like
Yeah.
overall prominence.
Okay, that's
Um,
what I was going to ask you. Describe what when you say peak, you're talking about its influence on the country. It's
yeah, industrial
okay.
output. It's
Okay.
very populous. We eventually start like importing all sorts of Eastern Europeans to Pittsburgh area.
Okay.
There's a continuous flow into Philadelphia all the while.
Hmm.
Um, the sort of green Appalachia area is still very, very
That's
Scots Irish to this very day.
okay. Yes. So
Like,
it's kind of interesting. Did Pittsburgh have a whole lot of Polacks,
yes, the most famous being
or
Andy
excuse me,
Warhol.
Poles? The most famous being who?
Andy Warhol.
Andy. What? Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
he's from Polish Hill in Pittsburgh.
okay.
It's
Now
mhm.
is that where he was doing a bunch of his art and whatnot?
Well, that's where he's a sort of mama's boy. That's where his like family home was. So he spent a lot of
Okay.
time there. But
Sure.
his
That
factory was in New York, I think.
okay. Sure. Um, Interesting. Yeah, because the how it started off, I got to thinking you had the Poles and more of the Eastern Europeans that started flocking to Chicago, and the Irish started flocking to Chicago, and then you had the ones down in Pittsburgh, and so in industrial terms, to some degree, you had some of the post war between the states blacks coming up into industry in Ohio, Indiana, and some of the greater Midwest, and then you also had the old line Germans that had been there that are suddenly getting squeezed by the new immigrants in the 20th century.
Yeah, you know the sort of shrewd robber barons also strategically place all of the newcomers right next to each other, so it's harder to organize too.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, so I don't think people really realize like um, how much of an economic powerhouse like Pennsylvania was, especially during like World War I and World War II. Um, um,
Well, I mean,
like
it's only Pittsburgh's football team. You know.
there's like a sort of satirical map, how like the War Department sees how the War Department sees the country. Like I'll just send it to you
Oh,
on
I got to
on
see. I
Twitter
was going to say
real
I got
quick.
to see this. Can I post it?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is how the War Department sees America during World War II, and you know almost a ton, like ever since like the Great White Fleet, Philadelphia is producing most of the ships. uh Pittsburgh is producing all of like the steel. Like Delaware is big because it produces like 80% of the explosives because of DuPont. um yeah, yeah, Delaware is responsible for this. The tiny state of Delaware produces most of the US's World War II explosives.
Yeah. Well,
DuPont,
I'm
yeah,
looking at it and I was freaking out for a second because I'm like, what did it stop at the Mississippi? And it's like, no, that's just the oversized influence that these states were having in comparison to anything west of the Mississippi.
yeah. So
Okay.
it's yeah. This is where Pennsylvania kind of has its peak.
Yeah,
And
for
you
sure.
also have captains of finance like Andrew Mellon. His son made a lot of headway very recently for funding the
Oh,
U.S.
is that
military.
when
Yeah.
I said Mayo earlier? Is it Mellon Carnegie or whatever the
So the so there
is that what
were
I was thinking
there
of?
so th- there are several Mellons, right? So the first was
Uh-huh.
Thomas Mellon, founder of Mellon Bank. His son Andrew Mellon uh, is he creates this giant, like what's it called, like Union Trust Company or something. Um, he ends up kind of bailing out the U.S. government during the Great Depression, and he's this sort of financial genius. And Andrew Mellon's son, I forget what his name is, but he's the one who bankrolled Trump in a lot of his early years.
Okay. Carnegie Mellon. That is what I was thinking of
Well, who do you
when
think
I had said
started it?
what's that?
Well, who do you think like started it? Um, it's Andrew Mellon,
Go
and
for it.
then
Yeah.
Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah.
They both essentially created out of thin air. Um,
Well, that's when when you said who started it just now, I was like, was it not Carnegie or Mellon? So okay.
yeah. Uh,
Okay.
and Andrew Mellon's I think his grandson is Timothy Mellon, who bankrolled Trump, and
Okay.
you know, has been funding a lot of the legal uh lawfare against illegal immigration during the Trump admin. Um, like Timothy Mellon, the grandchild of Andrew Mellon. he's a fantastic sort of like old money kind of guy. Like if you look at like his political history, he's playing 3D chess. Like no one actually knows anything about him. Uh, he actually did bankroll AOC's congressional run only to cause chaos within the Democratic Party. Like he's like an evil genius from his like little compound in Wyoming. But you know,
What
it's
a
it's
life.
it's all out of like everything came out of like Pittsburgh though. His old like the old family fortune.
Okay.
Um, and I guess after World War II, like I probably should wrap up in like the next 10 minutes, but after World War
Yeah.
II, there's been something of a decline, um,
Okay.
mostly due to deindustrialization and cleanup. Um, the EPA, for all its faults, it did make sure that we could fish in all of Pennsylvania's rivers again, and all of the Appalachians were essentially stripped bare of all trees during the turn of the century. And to give FDR credit, he did he did essentially seed the entire Appalachians of Pennsylvania with trees, so that there was green again. And the EPA did actually do a whole lot to restore the waterways to the point where we have river otters back in the Susquehanna again. Um, and a lot of the industrial runoff from like coal and iron production, a lot of that's subsided now, and it's a lot more drinkable. The water's a lot more drinkable now than it used to be.
Yeah.
Um, the development of the sort of fire economy, though, the suburbanization of the financialization of the creation of suburbs, especially outside of initially outside of Philadelphia, has developed a lot of the economy in like the late 1900s. Um, America, our biggest industry for our state is selling insurance.
Currently.
It's actually quite lame. Um, yeah,
That's currently the biggest
it,
industry in
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
it is.
Okay.
And we had after industry died out uh, after World War II.
Right.
There was a whole lot of urban decay. It's only really recently just come back. Um, yeah, like we notoriously had 3 Mile Island, the nuclear reactor that almost went Chernobyl on us in Harrisburg, central Pennsylvania. Um, we let's see. Um,
So I'm
yeah,
doing a quick search. I was curious on the agricultural output of Pennsylvania, and this is just a quick Google overlay. But it doesn't seem like there's anything in particular that sticks out. You raise a lot of corn, you raise a lot of hay.
Nick,
A
mhm.
portion of that goes to your beef herd and dairy herd, and then you do lead the state in mushroom production.
Yeah, it makes sense. I see a lot of those, but I don't
Okay.
know. Seems like a drop in the bucket for the overall economy. Um,
Yes.
there you do see a ton of like corn and soy everywhere, but
Mhm.
that's just this climate. Um, a lot of so there are a lot. I have a lot of faults with the Amish for a few different reasons.
Oh, that
Um,
we could do a stream on that. I would love to hear that.
so as a young engineer, I came across
Mhm.
statistics on different pollution in different tributaries across Pennsylvania
Yeah.
and Delaware, and a lot of the Amish are not particularly good at environmental regulation for their fertilizers and pesticides, and that
No.
leaches in.
Well, but I thought all the Amish were organic growers and everything they did was, kissed by God.
No, they also have the puppy mill
So
capital of America, and they don't
Well,
respect
and
property rights, hunting, and
I
lots of
say all this
child abuse.
because what happens is where I moved to, I'm driving horses, and I am not anymore. I've moved to a tractor at this point, but my market gardens and my farm used to be run exclusively with horses, and so in the course of that, a lot of dealings with Amish guys, and it's an interesting culture.
Yeah,
And I'll keep it short and leave it at that.
well, they're very good for I guess making furniture for you and building roofs and extensions for your house if you ever need it.
Yes.
It's definitely what I'd say. I do actually have to be going though pretty soon.
Yes. Okay.
It's getting kind of
Well,
late.
let's go ahead and if you want to wrap it up and make one last comment about Pennsylvania, but then yeah, do some shilling, and I will try and get a hold of your Substack real quick, and
Yeah,
we'll go from
sure.
there.
So I am I'm the regional. Well, I'm one of the founders of Old Glory Club. We are a sort of fraternal network order. We have like I'm responsible for managing the various chapters from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. And we have a whole lot of good guys that meet up and hang out, get go on all sorts of uh, historical events and meetups. I'd be glad to meet any of the guys in the audience if they end up signing up or contacting with any of the local chapters. I produced this sort of it's almost like a small book, Death and Taxes, on the Whiskey Rebellion. Um, I also wrote a very good article on the Knights of the Golden Circle called "Knights of the Final Filibuster" for OGC, and I'm also right now drafting another very large article called "Putches in Paradise" on essentially the various coups, um, pirates, and military adventures that Americans got up to in Hawaii, and I'll eventually come out with that probably later this year. But yeah, that's just about all of my shilling. I am hosting all sorts of live streams over the next 2 months, so check out my channel Clossington on YouTube. I think I have like 5 or 6 more uh, streams already on the schedule for the next 2 months, and I have a few more that I need to announce formally. So that's all I got for you.
Yeah, very good. Hey, I appreciate it. And then, like you said, you can find him on Substack. You can also find him writing for the OGC. And then I will have, I know I have, I'm going to double check the description of this video, try and make sure I have all the proper links in there for you, as well as your YouTube channel. But this was great. This was way more information about Pennsylvania than I thought I had an idea about it, but no, this was great. Lots of things I didn't know. And I hope everybody else was edified by it. What else? I have a fishing stream coming up. You can find us both on X. Like I said, the links will be in there. And on that note, we're going to call it an evening. So thanks you all for showing up, and we'll talk with you later.